Hi, it's Pat here from Olive Tree Life Ministries, bringing you the latest podcast. And today I want to talk about something that you're probably quite familiar with if you go to church, and that is the Aaronic Blessing, or the priestly blessing, or the Aaronic benediction, take your pick. And I think a lot of people think that it's in the New Testament, but actually, as the name implies, Aaronic blessing, it's in the Old Testament, and it's to be found in Numbers 6, verses 22 to 27. And that says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." And verse 27 says, "So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them." And I'll come back to that verse later. Now, I don't think it's any coincidence that God wrote the Bible in two of the most expressive ancient languages in man's history. The Old Testament in what we call Biblical Hebrew, which is very slightly different from the Hebrew that's spoken today in modern Israel. And ancient Greek in the New Testament, again, very slightly different. But both of these languages impart a degree of nuance and meaning and significance that we often miss in the English translations because we've just got nothing like it. And so I'm going to explore with you what the Hebrew translation actually says. What does the Aaronic blessing actually mean? Because it's not exactly what you're used to. It's far deeper than that. And the Hebrew goes like this: Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmarecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. And you're probably familiar with the word shalom, and you probably think it means peace. And we're going to look at that in a minute too. What it actually means is, and I'm going to go through it verse by verse with you, but what it actually means is, the Lord will lean down and invoke a greeting and a blessing upon you. The Lord will watch over and tend and treasure you, protecting you from evil, sickness, poverty and calamity. The Lord will clearly show you his face. Light, of course, is the symbol of happiness, prosperity and friendship, as well as purity and goodness. The Lord will incline favour, kindness, graciousness and pity towards you. The Lord will turn his face towards you, and the Lord will establish and set down upon you his shalom. And shalom doesn't just mean peace. Shalom means completeness, soundness, welfare, peace, health and prosperity. So let's go back to the Hebrew now, and let's break it down. Yivarecha Adonai comes from the verb barach, which means to bend the knee, to kneel down, to bless, praise, invoke, greet. V'yishmarecha comes from the verb shamar, to watch, keep, guard, retain, observe, attend, tend, treasure. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha, to be or to become bright or clear, to shine, to illumine. V'chuneka come from Hanan, to be inclined, favourable, kind, gracious, to pity, to have mercy. Yisa Adonai panav elecha, from Nasa, to lift up. God is turning his face to you and turning upon you his affection and loving care. V'yasem lacha, from sum, to set, establish, plant, put, set down, not give, set down or establish. Shalom. And again, that means everything you could possibly want for yourself and for those you love. It encompasses soundness and welfare and completeness and everything. And I think you'll agree that that is a far more fulsome blessing than the rather pale English version. Let's just look at this again. The Lord will lean down and invoke. So he's leaning down. You're not reaching up to him. He is leaning down to you, and he is invoking a greeting and a blessing upon you, which encompasses everything. Shalom, basically. The Lord will watch over and tend and treasure you. He treasures you. He doesn't just watch you and think, yeah, there's some of my creation there. He tends and treasures you. The Lord will clearly show you his face. And the Lord will incline favour and kindness and graciousness and pity towards you. In your most painful moments, God is pitying you. He isn't just sitting there with folded arms thinking, oh, I wish they'd get over that. He's actually pitying you. The Lord will turn his face towards you with affection and loving kindness is the implication there. And the Lord will establish and set down upon you his shalom, his completeness. And in the Hebrew, I think you can see, I had to run over a little on the third verse because I couldn't get all the words in one line, but it's actually 3 short verses of 3 words, and the second one is 5 words, and the third one is 7 words. And for those of you who like numerology, you could argue that the 3 signifies the Trinity, 5 represents God's grace, and 7 is, of course, the number of completeness. A Jewish theologian called Couch, German, nothing to do with the sofa that you sit on, said it mounts by gradual stages from the petition for material blessing, and in a beautiful climax culminates in the petition for God's consummate gift, shalom, the welfare in which all material and spiritual well-being is comprehended. Now, in temple times, the priestly blessing was one of the most impressive features of the service, and it's still an important part of synagogue worship, as it is in the church, and it passed to the church from the authors of the Reformation. In the temple, it was said by the high priest after the morning and evening daily sacrifices. In a synagogue, it's accompanied by an ancient melody. Only the priest, who now of course is the rabbi, can pronounce it, and it's said standing and with outstretched hands, always said in Hebrew. And I want you to note that although it's a sort of all-encompassing thing where the rabbi spreads his arms, the recipient of shalom, is in the singular. Now, Hebrew has a singular you and a plural you. A lot of languages do, but we've lost it in English. But in the Hebrew, it means you personally. So I think that's pretty precious. But what's the significance of it for us as Christians, as believers? Well, in Galatians chapter 3, verses 13 to 14, the Apostle Paul says, "Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, that the blessing of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles in Christ Jesus, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith." Now, if you listen to my podcast on Christians and the Jewish law, you'll remember that I said that the law actually, in the end, bestows a curse because, first of all, you can't keep it all, and secondly, all it does is remind us of our sin. And Jesus came to take away that curse, to take upon himself, to fulfill the law for you. And of course, he was hung on a tree, he was crucified. And through that, the blessing that was bestowed upon Abraham comes upon the Gentiles through Jesus, so that we might receive the Spirit, the promise of the Spirit, not through works, not through the law, but through faith. In God's purpose, there is only either blessing or cursing. God's first blessing was bestowed on the animals he had created. You can read about that in Genesis 1, verse 22. And it spoke of fruitfulness and multiplication. His second was on Adam and Eve in verse 28, and it spoke of the same. And that blessing, though, was turned into a curse by the sin of Adam. But God, in his mercy, renewed it, even before Jesus came to abolish the curse. God blessed Noah and his sons, Genesis 9, with the same words about fruitfulness and multiplication. And from Noah's son Shem came Abraham, the ancestor of Israel and the ancestor of Jesus, and spiritually speaking, of the believing Gentiles. So the blessing of Abraham comes down to us through Jesus. God richly blessed Abraham, not just in terms of material wealth, but in fruitfulness, both physical, because he was the ancestor of the people of Israel, and spiritual. Through the blessing bestowed on him, his faith blessed all the nations who believed in the one true God and his Messiah. Abraham's blessing was to be passed on from generation to generation, both by means of physical fathers to physical sons, but also by means of faith to spiritual sons. When Israel became a people, the blessing was commanded to be delivered to all of them, so they were to be fruitful and multiply, to take possession of the land which God was giving them. And with that blessing came prosperity. But their part of the bargain was to worship God and forsake all other deities. They would be expected to choose life over death. In other words, to do what was pleasing to God. And their failure to be fruitful spiritually was the trigger for Jesus to come and abolish the curse which the Israelites had allowed in again, and to pass the blessing back to believing Jewish people by faith. And also now to believing Gentiles, because the nations are now receiving the blessing of Abraham. Losing the blessing, as Esau realized, was a disaster because it stripped the people of everything they needed to prosper, materially, health-wise, spiritually. The whole shalom, in fact. In Romans 11, verse 17, Paul talks about the branches of the olive tree being broken off. And you, he says to the Gentiles, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, that is the branches that were Israel, and with them became a partaker of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Believing Gentiles are grafted in to the Jewish olive tree, and therefore are partakers of the benefits accorded to the Jewish people. They do not take it off them. The church does not replace Israel. The church is grafted in to Israel and shares the benefits. Now, Aaron, of course, was the first high priest. Jesus is our high priest. He blesses us as we come to know him. And just as the temple priest blessed the people daily, so Jesus has taken on the job. The renewed blessing bestowed by the hand of Jesus contains the same properties as the old covenant blessing, but it's more inclusive. And then in verse 27 of Numbers 6, if you remember, I read, "So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them." Put my name. God declares his nearness to his people. The living God sets his seal, that is his name, on his chosen ones, and that includes you. But what is the significance of being blessed? Well, we know that it's profound, and the words of the Aaronic Blessing feel very good when we understand that they apply to us as well as to Israel. Blessing in the Bible is very important. We've seen that it was accorded to the first animals and then to Adam, where it was squandered, to Noah and to his sons, through to Abraham, and he was told that he would pass it to the nations through him, and Abraham's progeny. When the Hebrews were living as serfs in Egypt, the blessing apparently dried up, but it was renewed when God brought the people out of that land and gathered them together as his people. And at various times throughout Jewish history, the blessing has been destroyed or damaged and has operated more like a curse. Jesus came to destroy the curse, but the blessing will only be operative if we accept him. Well, let's go back for a moment to Abraham and his descendants. The Bible tells us that after Abraham's death, God blessed Isaac. I'm sure Abraham pronounced a blessing on Isaac before he died, but God was the executive arm, and Isaac thrived under the blessing. His son Esau forfeited his blessing. Now, what does that mean? Esau was a dutiful son, the older of twins, his father's favourite. He could expect when the time came to inherit 2/3 of his father's property and land. This was his birthright. And you'll remember that the prodigal son, as the younger of the two, was entitled to a portion of his father's estate, although his elder brother would inherit most of it. The prodigal son asked his father to cash in his portion so that he could enjoy it in advance. There were strict rules laid down in Torah, in the Jewish law, about inheritance. But when Jacob took Esau's rights, he didn't just take his legal right to property, he also took his God-given right through the blessing bestowed on him by his father. The blessing then was a solemn ratification of everything that a son could expect to inherit. Let's look at Isaac's blessing on Jacob in Genesis 27, verses 28 and 29. "Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you." Now notice that it speaks of mastery and prosperity, like God's blessing on Adam. And the last two lines, "Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you," are straight from God's blessing to Abraham. The opposite of blessing is cursing, always. Christians, I think, often believe that God wouldn't curse, but the curse is operative where the blessing has disappeared because of sin. Esau sinned by lightly giving up his God-given rights, and his father's pronouncement on him, which couldn't be a blessing, was more of a prophecy. It spoke of material prosperity, but it also guaranteed a life full of strife. Esau was the father of the Edomites, a nation whose destiny was to be forever in conflict with God's chosen people. His wife was the daughter of Ishmael, the father of the Arab people, so his descendants were Arabs. Notice that when Jacob's fortunes looked in jeopardy, when the land was subject to famine, the blessing was revitalized by means of his son Joseph, who brought his family renewed peace and prosperity in Egypt for several generations. Jacob, when he pronounced his blessing on his sons, Genesis 48, first blessed Joseph, who was not the firstborn, but Joseph was the author of his renewed fortunes. But he also didn't bless him directly, he blessed him through his sons, and he took the secondborn as the firstborn. And pronouncing a blessing in verses 15 to 16, which again spoke of multiplication and fruitfulness. Ephraim, the younger son who received the blessing of the older son, did indeed become a great tribe and gave the alternative name to the northern kingdom of Israel later on. Jacob's blessing on the rest of his sons was more in the same vein as Isaac's pronouncement on Esau. In other words, it was not really a blessing, but a prophecy. Genesis 49 describes these prophecies as blessings according to his own blessing. Most of them don't give grounds for optimism, to be frank. And Joseph and Judah, the tribe of Jesus, come out best. So we see that the blessing was many things. It was an expression, whether coming direct from God or through him by means of someone else, as an expression of multiplication, fruitfulness, dominance, and embodying all these and more, shalom. And that was the good part of the blessing, but it could also be a device for avoiding the bestowal of all the benefits of shalom. It could give partial shalom, but it could also be expressed in the manner of a prophecy promising things which were not so good. However it was phrased, we can be sure that it came from God's word to that person. As Christians, we can bypass all the unpleasant half blessings because we derive our blessing from the purer strands, from Abraham, our spiritual father, from Aaron, the first high priest, who embraces us as Abraham's spiritual family in the all-encompassing words of the Aaronic Blessing. And just for good measure, to seal us with God's name through our high priest Jesus, who destroyed the curse which constantly militated against the blessing. So the next time you hear or bestow the Aaronic Blessing, remember the profound meanings of those Hebrew words. And I'll read them out again. Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmarecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lacha shalom. The blessing came down directly from God through Abraham. It can be damaged, but it's never completely withdrawn. It was ratified and reset by Jesus, our high priest. It's holistic, and it's for every one of us individually. So we should take that blessing seriously. It comes to you from the God of provision and grace. And as I said, it's directed at you personally. It will not be lost or set aside because it's been delivered again by our high priest Jesus. And its words are as profound now as they were 3,500 years ago. I'd like you to hear a song by Marty Getz and his daughter Misha. I'm putting the link on of this podcast, so I hope you can get it. If you can't, just put a message on the YouTube, and I'll see if I can send the link to you directly. But thanks for listening. I hope you've been blessed by this podcast, and just remember that it is God's blessing directed at you. So the next time you hear the Aaronic Blessing, remember those deeper meanings. God bless you.